Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Designing at the Speed of Light, presented by Luther Frank. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the presentation. However, there is a chat function where you can submit questions to the presenter and he'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar is being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, and we're also adding new sessions daily and have over 20 sessions scheduled for July, so watch for those coming up on the calendar. And now I'd like to introduce you to Luther Frank, the presenter for today's webinar. Luther is a lighting designer and scenographer for a variety of industries, including theater, dance, opera, concerts, nightclubs, live events, TV, and more. Operating out of New York City, he works on an average of 100 unique productions a year with an emphasis on lighting, projection, and scenic design. Now I'll pass it over to you, Luther.
Thanks so much. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. As Laura said, I'm Luther Frank. I'm a lighting designer and stenographer. This will be my third webinar for Martin. The other two are already up on YouTube, one on making immersive theater, focusing in on an original opera I designed a few years back in an immersive style, and a second webinar on live music and busking and programming live and putting that kind of environment up with little to no time or pre-production. So I work in a variety of fields, and I tend to have a hand in a large number of shows every year, but I definitely still consider myself an early career designer. I designed my first show around 15 years ago, but I've only been in New York for 5 years, and that's when my career really started to take off. I went from working on a handful of shows a year, maybe 5 or 10, to 100, you know? So today I'm going to talk about how to build that career. There are a lot of great resources out there on specific design skills. However, I'm not going to talk today about how to mix color or how to draft. Instead, I'll talk about how to go about those tasks in an efficient manner, so that you don't become overwhelmed in your own process. The primary goal of this lecture is to help you improve your efficiency so that you can realize your full potential. You know, there's never enough time, right? Most of us know what it feels like to overextend ourselves or to take on too much work or simply get bogged down somewhere in the process. As my workload grew over the years, I managed to mess up my life pretty bad. This seminar is born out of my mistakes more than anything. Hopefully this lecture will serve as a guide for doing all the work you want to do without ruining your life in the process. I actually gave this seminar at a conference 2 years ago. 3 years ago, I was at a conference, Show Light in Florence, which is a wonderful conference that I'll talk about a little bit later on. And I was sitting next to a gentleman discussing the session we had just watched together. And at one point he asked me about my work, and when I let it slip that I had worked on 99 shows that year, which at the time I could hardly believe, that was the first time I'd done so much, he all but demanded that I come and speak at his conference the next year. So the following year at Scanlight, 2018 in Malmo, I opened up one of the days with a quick 20-minute presentation on design efficiency. And that's me there in the title slide. Even since then, I've learned so much more on managing myself and my designs and my working process. It's an ongoing exploration. So today's session will be longer than 20 minutes, but it will still be broadly defined, and it will function mostly as a springboard. I want it to be a starting point for you to identify the specific parts of your process that might be holding you back. I'm not here to tell you how to design. I don't want to tell you how to be an artist, but I do want to help you take a look at your workflow and determine what could use a little extra focus should you want to expand your career. I've chosen to focus on the parts of the process that I've struggled with in the past, and the parts I've seen my colleagues struggle with, as well as share some wonderful methods I've copied and stolen from more experienced designers who have inspired me to do more. So here's a quick rundown of the topics. We'll be touching on each of these rather quickly. Every single one of these topics warrants their own webinar, and plenty of them already do, so that's nice. But we're going to look at all of these through the lens of efficiency and ease of access, right? At the end, I'm going to provide at least one resource that you can investigate after this session is over, so that you can say, yes, my drafting needs work. Where do I go? And I'll have provided at least one resource. Now I'm going to start with a quick introduction. I'll show you how my career rapidly evolved and how my life improved dramatically once I started putting these methods into action. Then I'll go into each topic specifically. So we'll look at a few of the principal tools, the fundamental elements of any given show, starting obviously with research, how it's gathered, compiled, how to get to it quickly, share it and alter it. and moving into drafting. Regardless of software, how that integrates into your process and the tools you can use to streamline it and simplify the drawing. Programming, of course, gets talked about a lot and can be incredibly personal, but there are a lot of smart choices being made out there that I'd like to share. And then the big one, color. I mean, obviously we could talk effects or movement or shape or any number of other design elements, but color is such a monster that I felt it deserved a little bit of separate attention. Thankfully, there are a ton of resources on color, including a few Martin lectures focusing just on that. So after we take a look at efficient color analysis, you'll definitely have next steps available for you. Then we'll look at the ancillary elements of design. I don't feel like these get enough attention. The truth is we don't design in a vacuum. We're not artists laboring alone in service of ourselves. We work in a community, and our lives integrate with so many people. So I want to talk about the ways in which other people have helped build my career just as much as good drafting has. I do want to talk about time management and lifestyle as well, and there's a very serious reason why. And after all that is done, I will recap, and I want to talk about my favorite books I consider mandatory reading if you want to work this way. I keep all these on hand for reference, and I hope you'll see why once we get through them all. I'm going to keep that slide up through the Q&A portion, as there will be a lot of text on that slide, which also means if you're watching this on YouTube, you can just skip to the end for the resource list if you're curious about that, which is something I always enjoy when I watch a webinar online. So let's talk just for a little bit about my career and why I was asked to write this webinar in the first place 2 years ago. I started off in the theater world, adhering pretty strictly to those traditions and expectations. I spent maybe the first 4 or 5 years doing just theater, dance, musicals, opera, and then I went to college. I spent some time working in other areas of the industry to pay for that degree. So I did some arena work, as a stagehand, just a deckhand, a laborer. And that was the first time I really saw speed and efficiency unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I'll never forget working on those crews, unloading 20, 30, sometimes 50 semi-trucks full of gear, getting it all up in an 8-hour call, and then stripping it all down in a 6-hour call at midnight, and of course, getting up for class at 8 a.m. right after. So, I mean, that was the first lesson in working too hard, and I didn't listen too well. But it was a way to shake me out of my traditions, You can do big, beautiful things really fast. It just takes skill and attention. So after that, I started doing single-day events, traveling artists, small festival work, but it was still mostly the art world where I spent my time. So in 2014, I was finishing up grad school, and my average year consisted of 10 shows, mostly theater, and I do want to say here that I love that. So there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to do 10 shows a year, do that. I didn't know I wanted to work the way I do now until I had already started down that path. In 2015, I graduated and I moved to New York, and I was quickly asked to do more work than I ever had before. 2016, I worked on 80 shows, and this was one of the worst years of my life, hands down. I worked so long, so hard, spread myself so thin that I literally made myself sick. By the winter of that year, I was extremely ill, and I continued to work. I had a weakened immune system, and I just kept pushing. And finally, after the season ended and January rolled around, I was hospitalized. I had contracted a muscle-eating virus that nobody in their young 20s should get. I should have been healthy, but I worked myself nearly to death. Now, there was a long recovery period from that, and thankfully I'm in good shape today. But the following year was when I went to Show Light, and if you recall, I still managed to work on 99 shows that year. Yet I was happy and healthy and really figuring things out, which is why I felt comfortable giving that talk that year. The next year I would continue to increase my workload, going up to about 120 shows, and then last year my total was around 135. So for obvious reasons, I don't think I'll be breaking 100 shows this year. Things are a little bit different, but nothing has changed in my process regardless of that fact. The tools I deploy are useful whether you're working on 10 shows or 100. These are the tools that keep me out of the hospital. I want to be clear, this lesson is not born out of success, it's born out of failure. So throughout this time, I had the good fortune of learning from very experienced designers, Broadway, rock and roll, big names you probably recognize. Our industry is filled with genius, and you should have no shame in taking a good idea from those people. Those people are also very open for the most part. When I visit them at their tech tables or their previews or backstage, they're eager to throw me a magic sheet or a piece of drafting. Programmers have handed me entire flash drives just full of their best stuff. This generosity of spirit is also something I believe is healthy and should be embraced as soon as you have the chance to. So with that in mind, let's go over the specifics. First and foremost in most designers' process is research. Whether you have a text, a brand name, a piece of music, research is obviously useful in gathering your thoughts and insights as a project continues. I've tried many different methods of collecting and organizing my research over the years, everything from physical collections of objects to mood boards, both in paper and online, and of course reference books, on art, architecture, and clothing. You have it. The biggest stumbling block I've run into regarding research is that regardless of my methods, I found it very easy to fall down a rabbit hole and get lost in it. I know myself and my colleagues have gotten lost in our own minds and just spend too many hours sifting through research again and again. I don't necessarily want to discourage that part of the process. However, the best piece of advice I was given was to treat research the same way I treat drafting, the same way I treat any of the other tools we use. It needs to be functional. Research can be messy and personal, but eventually you need to develop a system by which you take that fun, chaotic collection of potential ideas and organize them into simplistic, goal-oriented structures. Now, the great thing about figuring out a codified method to storing and organizing research is that it will pay dividends years down the road. Even more so than maybe drafting or programming, which has an immediate and obvious technical use when properly templated or copied, but research can come out of nowhere and surprise you later in your career. An example I can offer that changed my perspective on this was a couple years back. I was working on a dance show, and on my days off, I was doing single one-off events in the music industry. So I was fairly busy and distracted, and it just so happened that during my commute between a couple jobs, I bumped into a director I hadn't worked with in a long time. And within 5 minutes, we were chatting about some research we had compiled together, but it was vague and clouded in our memories. I got lucky that time. I was able to pull out my tablet and find the old show and the specific images we were thinking of. And that 5-minute conversation sort of reinvigorated our creative energies together, and we went on to plan another big, beautiful show. At that time, my structure was pretty messy and unclear. And after I went back and started cleaning things up, I had this sort of interaction happen again and again and again. And it's changed my priorities a little bit. I now believe that accessibility should be a major goal in your research. I think it's great if you have a box at home that contains all the inspiration you need to get a design done. That's great. But if you can take that box and catalog it and make it accessible, it may start putting work towards future projects you aren't even aware of yet. So I want to offer some simple advice on how to go from a messy creative to a somewhat organized designer. The first thing you need is to choose a delivery method. And by that, I mean a cloud service, an archival provider. You can see one of my research folders here. On the left, you'll notice I have Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, and the Creative Cloud. These are all accessible on every device I own and constantly sync and back each other up. Whatever you choose, you should embrace the fact that it needs to be accessible. A big thing to watch out for today is Smart Sync or online only or any other feature that keeps your data only in the cloud and prevents local storage, because I guarantee you will be working in conditions without internet. It will happen. So make sure you dedicate the local storage. Make sure your inspiration is literally in your back pocket at all times. The next thing I recommend is that you develop a personalized naming convention to your storage system. You can see a little bit of my process here. If your screen resolution is high enough, you can see the highlighted folders are there at the top left. So you can see the structure here goes Productions, New Camerata, Lucretia, Lighting, Research, Raw Concepts. This structure is actually a saved template of pre-named folders elsewhere in my Dropbox. So when I start a new project, I just copy the template, and after renaming the first folder with the company and show title, all of my folders are exactly where they belong. It's already divided between scenery, projections, lighting. Raw and final concepts get separated out, and I actually also have folders for other team members, because I actually find my colleagues sometimes don't have this stuff ready to go either, and so I'll be the first one to share sort of a company resource folder, which is great because then everybody's using my structure. I also go one step further and I rename images based on specific concepts of ideas I have pertaining to those images. So now it's easy for me to answer my own questions. The sad fact is I cannot remember all the research across these hundreds of shows that I've worked on. But I often get that inspirational tick in the back of my head that goes, hey, remember that opera you had that stage concept for? You didn't end up going that way, but the reason, what was that? What was that concept? And now I can go into the search bar and just type out scenery or fabric or contrast or any number of adjectives and be wonderfully surprised by my old research, my old thoughts. And this has increased my speed tenfold. I feel like my research library just gets better and better. And each year I'm more efficient with getting my ideas from a concept to a drawing early on. So let's talk about drawing then. Now, drafting can be an interesting topic to cover when speaking to a broad audience. I came from an educational theater background, and drafting was treated as this sacred, singular idea from which there could be no deviation. And then when I spread out from that world and started looking at drawings from rock and roll and the event world, I started to see just how rare the standardized form was. I do have to make an argument for the standards, though. Drafting is about communicating ideas, right? The best piece of drafting is the one that requires zero explanation. If someone asks me a question about something in the drawing, then I probably could have drawn it in a clearer way. And I've lost some amount of time and energy in fixing that issue. So I'm going to talk about a lot of resources at the end of the lecture, but I do want to bring up Steve Shelley now for anyone in the audience who hasn't heard of it. There is a developed set of standards designed to make you a better draftsman, and it'll help your drafting get to the point where it is clear as it can be from the start. Steve Shelley has collected these standards in his book. He helped codify them in a practical guide to stage lighting. Again, this will be at the end. So if you're learning to draft, I highly recommend you pick up this book and give it a try. I know a ton of my colleagues are doing some free training right now in the drafting software of their choice, and that's great. You're going to learn how to operate the software from that training, but there's an entirely different set of skills regarding drawing in a clear and concise way that will translate across multiple industries. So if you can establish a template or a base file that already adheres to those standard conventions, you will save yourself countless hours, entire days even, of redrawing and error fixing. It's truly incredible what a little bit of standardization can do to your process. Now, with that said, I do understand where the conventions can fail us sometimes. Separate areas of the industry tend to develop their own vernacular, their own lingo. They use specific types of gear, and they want that gear drawn in specific ways. So here's where personalization comes in. If I'm going to draft a traditional theater show, I'm going to use the file that I've created that has all the symbols, title blocks, conventions that they are expecting. I have an entirely different set of symbols that I may use for a fashion show or a nightclub. I will even create small groups of symbols based on the inventory of a particular production company so that I know the fixture that I want shows up exactly where I want it to be. Sometimes that feels a little silly, right? Like, why can't everyone just agree that the old school symbol for the Lico was the best, Unfortunately, I don't have that power, I've fought many uphill battles with production managers and crew chiefs out in the field. And in the end, it's much more valuable to simply take in the working process of your coworkers and draft clearly and concisely in a way that they can read. So that being said, you should still establish your own personal plates that are standard across all your documents. I highly suggest you create a title block, an instrument key, all the associated nameplates and information panels, all that stuff you see on the sides of this drafting here. I suggest you do these because when I hand over a piece of drafting, I want the production manager or the electrician to go, oh, this is a Frank lighting drafting. The key is right where I expect it to be. Here are the notes. All right, let's get moving. You want to simplify the uptake of this drawing, and even just that little bit of standardization, it'll go a long way. Next, I want to take a look at efficient programming. This topic has exploded in recent years. 5 or 10 years ago, I feel like it was a bit esoteric, a bit hard to find good resources on structuring a programming workflow, but now they're everywhere. Whatever your console of choice is, I can safely assume there are excellent training resources out there from both the manufacturer and third parties and independent programmers. So while I can't talk about the specifics of your programming language today, I do want to share some of the strategies that I have used to keep me sane and quick on my feet in this kind of career. So to the left there, you can see a few different programming environments that I've found myself in. The top is a Broadway musical tour during tech. The bottom left is a one-day event in a zoo where I got thrown in some bushes. And the third is actually the studio I walked into for the first time after my last lecture with Martin. That previous lecture talks quite a bit about how you would structure a programming workflow for the chaos of live music. So if you're trying to be a live music or live event programmer or designer, I suggest you check that one out because you'll get a whole hour on just that. But I'm talking about big picture efficiency today. So the most sincere lesson I learned about programming was about accessibility. Desks crash, flash drives get lost, files get corrupted. Eventually, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you are hoping and praying that you have a backup somewhere. So if you haven't done this already, do it today. Get your base file up in the cloud somewhere. I keep my base file for the 3 console languages I know best uploaded in 2 separate cloud storage environments, Google Drive and Dropbox. And those are backed up locally on my 2 computers, one in my office and one in my bag. Then I keep 2 flash drives on site with me in my bag and 1 more in my desk drive at home. I do this insane amount of backing up because I've been burned badly by not doing so in the past. And after I started making sure this was a part of my workflow, I've actually been able to step in at a moment's notice and take over for other designers and programmers in an emergency, which has been a lot of fun. Even if I'm at a club or a show or maybe just hanging out with other designers or programmers, even if I just have my phone, as long as I have a USB cable, I can still get my file onto a drive or computer and be ready to roll in minutes should I be asked to do so. So again, if your file isn't accessible 24/7 without internet access, I highly encourage you to work on that immediately. And an important aside, I also encourage you to keep the software version of your choice on that drive as well. When you're swapping consoles live or working across multiple production companies, you can never be sure you're going to get the same version, even from the same shop, So my next points are going to get a little bit more technical, and obviously the specifics of this is going to depend on your console language, but I think it's important to learn to analyze and build your file in a modular way. And what I mean by that is that you should be able to open up your file, either at work or at home or in a cafe, wherever, and say to yourself, I really need to organize specifically how my default color page works for TV, and open up that data so that you can work on it. I know my files have gotten absolutely huge in the past, especially once you start doing big pixel maps or magic sheets or other resource-intensive programming. It's not essential that all of that data be in every single file. This can actually be an issue. I've had some programmers who are far more advanced than me, like full-time professional programmers. They'll show me their file and tell me very straightforward, if I upload all of my magic sheets into a file, it'll take 10 minutes to load and probably crash the desk, especially if I'm not using the newest and biggest console. And all that work is valuable, but it's organized in a way so that depending on the project, you can select a specific portion and bring that one into the workflow. This is mainly accomplished, again speaking generically here, through a very specific and memorable alphanumeric relationship within the data. Most programmers I know will actually dedicate some crazy range of numbers to their own personal workflow outside of a designer's purview. And as a designer programmer, I still do this myself. My programmer brain will put non-show data off in that range, and I'll work down in the low numbers on this particular project. So an example, we're about to talk color, so we'll use that. I have different layouts and organization for color depending on where I'm working. Dance, TV, film, concerts, they all have a different feel to me in terms of color. So I like talking and thinking about them in a different way. So I've dedicated a range in the thousands. So we'll say color palettes 3,000 through 3,999. Those are storage. And within that storage, the first 100 are my go-to theatrical. And then I have a white balance range of 100 to 200. And then I have a rock and roll section with mixed palettes and contrasting, odd even ideas in the 300s to 400s. So, all your parts of your programming can have this. Gobo, intensities. Sorry about that. My cats are being a little rude. And now, your other parts of your programming will have that same stuff. Your gobos, your intensities, your effects will all have corresponding data ranges, in the 2000s and the 4000s. This has to be something specific to you. If you copy someone else's range structure, unless you truly take time to rebuild and understand it yourself, it's highly unlikely to function well. So I encourage you to take your best ideas that you're already deploying and start thinking about a numerical structure that makes sense to you. The first time I did this years ago, I actually used a spreadsheet. So I still encourage that. Grab a spreadsheet and lay things out in tables. If you're a math kind of person, this tends to work out. Whatever your method is, it's important that you find it and practice it. Once you do, you're going to see productivity at the desk shoot through the roof. I promise. So I want to talk about color because it's complex. It's so personal and it's so important to every project we do. It's also been a process that's become highly disrupted by LEDs and the ever-evolving nature of our color tools, both in software and physical space. I think I'll spend my entire life wrestling with color. I don't think that'll ever stop. I think that's why I believe it's important to fall in love with color, and if possible, develop a love language, with color that you become incredibly intimate with. So off to the left there is a scan from Ann McMill's The Assistant Lighting Designer's Toolkit. That's Ken Billington's Moving Light Color Palette. And if you don't know who Ken is, I highly encourage you to take a look at his career. He's a very famous Broadway designer with credits including Chicago, Sweeney Todd, and many more I'm sure you would recognize. I've had the good fortune to be able to visit Ken at his tech table a few times, and watching him deploy color with his programmer was amazing. You can see here that he's organized his concept of color across 100 ideas. And, you know, it's divided up across the spectrum in a similar way to what consoles will spit out if you ask them to auto-generate. But you can see that this is highly specific and way more powerful than anything the desk can do for you. You can see that most of these colors have a gel equivalent, and regardless of instrument type, he's noted at the top that it should match the arc source fixture. So hopefully that everything in the rig will match up to each other. This takes a lot of work to get right, but thankfully our desks are intelligent enough now to carry this work from project to project, and they go into that storage range. So this color chart allows him to very quickly, cue to cue, have the colors he's in love with readily available and easily shareable with his associates and programmers, which is another part of the process people tend to ignore. You know, clarity in your own process will make communicating and working with others more efficient as well. You know, now I'm sure his process changes over time, just like all of ours do, but it's a great example, I think, of a concise and beautiful way to structure your ideas. So I encourage you to spend some time and figure out your language, your organization of your best ideas. So many times I've watched newer programmers or designers just get lost rolling the RGB faders back and forth all day, losing time and sanity, you know, in critical moments. And so that leads to my next point, that color, much like other parts of our process, is ultimately data-driven. You know, there are so many ways to talk about describing color. Many of these are based in physical tools, such as the actual RGB diodes or CMY flags. But others are technical in nature, like HSI, you know, hue, saturation, intensity, or even Pantone or hexadecimal, you know, HTML color. I've been asked to match a Pantone or a hex color provided by a brand, and you have to understand how to do that translation quickly, you know, in RGB or CMY. So, you know, I also think you need to have a baseline understanding of spectrometers and what your colors should look like when metered. You know, there are a lot of deep intellectual discussions regarding color in our industry happening right now, especially concerning things like metamers, you know, multiple ways to mix to the same color with different arrays of diodes, which is too complex for this lecture. But I do think you should consider these data-driven approaches to color and catalog and include them in a way that makes sense to your process. That's why I have so many different layouts for color. It will save you time so that you're not figuring out these concepts from scratch on site. Now I want to move on to maybe the best part of working in this industry. You know, we've talked about the principles of design and how to improve efficiency in those areas, but honestly, that's maybe half the story, or even less. You know, I survive at the pace I keep because of the incredible network of support around me. You know, to the left, you can see a couple examples. You've got Richard Pilbrow up there in the top right. That was 2 years ago when he saw this lecture at Scanlight. And the left image, you've got me and a director down there in the bottom. Up at the top left, a great PM and a fellow designer programmer of mine. And down on the bottom right, that's a few other recognizable faces. Susan Rose and Eric Price are in that shot. They both have Martin lectures of their own that you should check out. The point I want to make here is that you should treat your colleagues with the same care and attention that you do your drafting or your programming, you know? Starting with support networks, I have a list of people I would affectionately call Ghostbusters, you know? In other words, when things aren't going well, who are you going to call? You know, when you're stuck behind a desk or a computer screen and stuff isn't working and your stress is going through the roof, it's way more valuable in terms of energy and efficiency that you take a step back and call someone, you know? There's no shame in this. A huge number of programmers in particular, but also designers, have all given me their numbers and picked up the phone when I've been in trouble. You can't possibly know it all. You never will. We all need support at some time. So embrace it. Offer it when you can, and don't be afraid to reach out when you need it. I also think you need to keep manufacturers' numbers immediately on hand, especially consoles, but also software and gear. A quick call to support can often save you hours of on-site troubleshooting. You know, someone paid for that gear. They paid for that service. So no fear, call them up. They want to help, you know. As far as team building is concerned, my attitude changed completely once I started working on so many shows. And there was a bit of ego in my educational days about what it meant to be an assistant versus a designer versus a, you know, programmer. That was quickly shook out of me once I had the chance to work for some great people. In a lot of the books I'm going to reference at the end, there are quotes and pieces of advice from other designers that I tried my best to take to heart. So now when I look for teammates, associates, assistants, programmers, or if I'm fulfilling that role, I try to make sure that that person or myself is significantly more skilled than the designer in at least one thing, you know? With something like a console, that's obvious. I mean, you want your programmer to be better than you are at the console language, you know? But it can be paperwork. It can be technical knowledge. It could be, you know, understanding of the gear. It can be anything, but it's important to seek out those skilled individuals, take note of their strengths, and play to them, and respect that skill. So now I have a list of people I call for specific jobs. I call different assistants, different colleagues when I'm working in a theater versus a rock show versus a museum. I need to be able to lean on and rely on my team. Building this network over time is critical to your ongoing success, or at least it has been to mine. Finally, I think it's important to appreciate the community itself. People, you got to remember we're all in this together, and not everybody's going to be on your team, and it's not always about the next job. I think this is particularly obvious right now during the shutdown. There's a lot of solidarity, a lot of outreach and group support, which I think is awesome. It's very easy to fall into a me versus the world mentality, or to be protective of your process or your programming or drafting files and treat them like they're your sacred things. But I found generosity and openness to be an almost universal quality in the designers I want to emulate. Again, all the big names I've studied, all the people who have inspired me, they've been the most willing to share and help. So if you can, when they return, of course, I highly suggest you go to some conferences and go meet and be with people outside of your job. LDI is a big one here in the States. Plaza is a big one in Europe. I personally try to go to one a year. And every time I do, I meet new people and I stay in touch with old friends. And I can specifically point to moments at those places where my career made these little jumps, not to mention the overwhelming opportunities for learning. But even if you don't go to a conference, I highly encourage you to socialize in our industry with your peers. Most cities and sectors of the industry, they have their particular hangouts. It could be clubs or bars or semi-annual events, cookouts, even intramural sports leagues, if that's your thing. We need to decompress sometimes. And if that's not a part of your process, you're likely to burn out in a very dangerous way, just like I did. So next, I want to talk about time management. This is a common subject, and there are a lot of information on organizing your life, but I'm going to share my personal thoughts and some things that helped me figure this out in the recent past. So first and foremost, especially in the theater industry, meetings. Good God, the meetings. I can't think of a single other part of this process that can be more destructive or unproductive than a poorly run meeting. I'm sure most of you would agree. I haven't really met a designer who hasn't been to a meeting that just dragged on and felt pointless. When you're overbooked and you're juggling multiple projects, these meetings can be sincere wastes of precious time. So I want to offer a simple suggestion. Please read Let's Stop Meeting Like This by Dick and Emily Axelrod. This book changed my life. It's kind of amazing. Again, I'll cover it again at the end. But it was written for the corporate world, but it's so simple and it's genius. Almost anyone can benefit from reading it. You may be saying like, well, I don't have any power over my meetings. I'm at the mercy of a producer or a stage manager. I'm too far down the totem pole. The book addresses that. It has a lot of powerful tools that you can bring with you into a meeting to change the dynamic. I'll share a quick one, and that's that you should personally try to make your meetings objective driven. The best way to do this is to understand the meeting is coming and determine a task or objective that cannot be accomplished alone. Maybe it's a question regarding moving scenery or audio around, or maybe it's regarding a gear change. Write down the objective and begin working on solutions before the meeting. Then the meeting isn't a place where you're discussing them. Instead, you're bringing up those solutions quickly and concisely, and you have an objective reason to break from the meeting and get the work done. So I know that's a little vague, but the book contains a great deal of information on how to turn your meetings into productive, objective-driven encounters. It's marvelous. I highly recommend it. Now, scheduling is a bit of a broader topic. I've included my schedule from April of last year just as a fun comparison. This April, I worked on 2 projects, just some broadcast stuff. We are obviously shut down completely here in New York, so I was thankful to just have 2. But you can see last April was a bit chaotic. Every one of those black items is a larger note, the start of at least a few hours of work, if not an entire evening. In that month, I was assisting an amazing designer, Don Chang, in an off-Broadway theater show. I was having meetings for a dance piece that I was designing the following month, and I was putting up an opera on the 1st of May, which I was designing scenery, lighting, and props for. And in between those 3 time-intensive projects, I worked on 11 single-day show events, So clearly, when you're juggling all these projects, scheduling isn't as simple as it would be in like an office environment. Every day has different call times. Days in the theater would be 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., whereas those event days would be 2 p.m. to 3 a.m., and you can see there were no days off. So amidst that chaos, it's important to ask yourself some fundamental questions. When are you naturally most effective? When is your brain functioning at peak capacity? No matter how much I try, years, I cannot manage to turn myself into a morning person. I'm always groggy, and I always do my best work between 5 p.m. and midnight. So I try to schedule my decisions around that fact. My mornings I kept simple. I made the same choices regarding breakfast every day. I made low-energy tasks like email or note-taking, things I would focus on in the mornings. And then in the afternoon and evenings, I would schedule my drafting, my research hours, or any creative activity. If I had done the reverse, I would have been twice as tired and half as effective. So you can see that process is going to depend highly on yourself. You need to schedule yourself within the confines of expectations so that you can remain productive and healthy. On that note, I think it's very important to respect the breaks as given. Certain industries are well regulated. Theater and opera tend to give you regular union-specified breaks. Other industries, you get semi-random, when a crew chief decides it's time, But I think you should lean into these, don't fight them. When I was working with Dawn on that theater show, I would take the opportunity during every small break to walk out onto the roof. We had roof access, which was nice. I'd walk out onto the roof and do some stretching in the sun, On other projects, particularly in TV or film where I'm stuck in a small room, I took a time to do some push-ups or something to get the blood flowing because I felt caged. I used to work through breaks, and occasionally that still happens, but I think it's a big mistake. I think if you spend some time observing your own workflow, using a break to shake things up will make you more productive overall. So please respect the break, and you earned it, And finally, along a similar line, I want to talk broadly about lifestyle choices that strongly shape our productivity in this career. The absolute biggest change in my life, the difference between being hospitalized from working on 80 shows to being in the best health of my life working on 135, is an acceptance of mental and physical capacity. I grew up in a mentality that demanded 110%, always strain, always push harder, always work longer. It's not fair, and it's not sustainable, and quite humorously, it's not required. Don't get me wrong, I'm advocating for giving 100%, but that requires skill and time to understand what that looks and feels like for you. So I've included a picture here of Steve Jobs wearing the same outfit for 10 years, of his career, if not longer. It may not come as a surprise, but that was an intentional choice. It wasn't based in fashion. It's kind of the opposite. There's a well-documented theory, and it touches on minimalism a bit, but not always, that we experience decision fatigue throughout the day. The more responsibilities you have, the more those decisions are going to start cascading in stress level. And that places a strain on your body. Eventually, if you end up bearing the weight of huge, life-changing decisions on a daily basis, you become exhausted. So Steve Jobs, along with people like Einstein, Mark Zuckerberg, Dr. Dre, it's incredible, really. All of these people chose to take clothing out of the equation. They'll do other things too. They'll eat the same food. They'll schedule a time to do a specific habit. It can be a number of things. The important thing is to recognize that you only have so much energy, so much capacity for decision making, and we work in an industry that asks a lot from us. So consider simplifying parts of your life if you can. I'm not asking you to wear the same clothing every day if you don't want to. I don't, but I do eat the same breakfast. I've managed to spend, to manage my time so that some aspects occur with regularity, and I try to plan simple solutions for the times when I'm stuck in the chaos. For instance, my next point on nutrition and sleep, in that month of April, my schedule was wild, obviously. So I chose to simplify my nutrition for that month. Every morning I was with Dawn in the theater. I would pick up breakfast and a snack at the coffee shop around the corner. Some veggies, some fruit, and some coffee. I didn't have to think about it. It wasn't a decision. For the nights that I was working some event, I'd have a meal replacement shake in my bag ready to go. I would only use this if a meal wasn't provided, but in the chaos, it sometimes isn't. So I'm prepared to handle that situation without any undue stress. This lets my productivity go unwasted. My attention can remain on being a creative force. I think it would be wise to determine some personal rules of your own and stick to them as best you can. I remember when I first moved to New York, I was working on a lot of different big crews, Fashion Week and, for a handful of production companies. And the only thing similar from job to job was that they tended to feed these crews on pizza, pizza every day, sometimes twice a day. And it was making me sick. I occasionally tried to walk away or to make a decision in the moment of whether or not I could stomach it. But this was unwise. I was wasting my energy. In the end, I finally made a commitment. And it took me more than a year, but I said no more pizza at work, period. Never. It cannot be done. And if that's what's provided, I'll either walk away or grab a snack from my bag. But most people are actually willing to work with me, and they started ordering side salads for these crews as well. For the most part, people understand. We all want to work with you, and we're all fair and rational about it if you are. So give it some thought, take some stressful decisions out of the equation. I think the best tool for figuring all this out, everything we talked about today, is through journaling. Some kind of self-reflection and analysis is necessary if you want to improve your process. Years ago, I didn't do this. I just took every day, one at a time, and dealt with things as they came. And that felt fine in the moment, but things are so much better now with just a little bit of introspection. I made up my mind to do this one day when I was working at the Metropolitan Museum here, and I was chatting with our generator op. And he's an older man who's worked in this industry for decades. And he told me, you know, I wish I kept a diary. I've met so many famous people, I've seen so many amazing shows, and it's all just a jumbled mess in my memory. I could have written one hell of a book if I'd just taken some notes. And I realized how right he was. I mean, I was 1 year into the chaos, and I couldn't remember a damn thing, you know? So I kept a small journal on me that year, and I wrote one tiny page a day, very, very small. It just listed where I was, who I was working with, and why. And when I looked back at the end of the year, that's when I finally realized the mess I was in. Now, that physical journal had the same issues that physical research has had in the past. It wasn't searchable. It wasn't well-defined. It was useful, but not accessible. So since then, I've gone digital, but I still keep it simple. You know, I use a naming convention in my calendar that keeps decent track of where I've been and who I've been with. And then I take at least one photo on my phone from the workday, even if it's boring or easy or, you know, a bland, uninteresting photo. Because these photos get automatically uploaded and they basically catalog themselves by date. They even get geotagged most of the time right on the venue. So now I have this great record of all this work. I can access where I've been and what I did. And because it's all dated, I can quickly access any drafting or programming or research related to that project as well. It's the final piece of the puzzle, you know. The best way to make sure you keep going strong is to always have your past work supporting you as you go forward. So that's the crux of it. That's the story. That's the methods. I know a lot of this was simplified for time, so now it's time to talk books. I want to go through each topic and give you at least one resource that you can use after this lecture to go on your own path. And after I go through these resources, we'll do a quick Q&A, so please feel free to get those questions ready. All right, so first let's talk research. As I said, I believe research is an inherently personal matter, but that doesn't mean there aren't some really great methods out there. So Twyla Tharp is a fairly famous choreographer. She's created work for her own company as well as New York City Ballet, Paris Opera Ballet, London Royal, you name it. Her book, The Creative Habit, is really powerful. It's not solely about research. It focuses on the entire creative process, but there is an emphasis on finding your energy, you know, sustaining and maintaining your creative habits, sussing out the spine of your work, you know, getting in the mind in a state to perform amazing research and development. It spans all genres of creativity. It's not about dance, really, so I highly recommend this book if you sometimes struggle to get a project off the ground, or if you don't feel comfortable with how you're starting your work, you know. Next, we have drafting, and I brought that up before. Steve Shelley, Practical Guide to Stage Lighting. It's detailed, it's heavy, it's a permanent reference manual. Regardless of what software you're using, or God, even if you want to draft by hand, Steve Shelley has the answers for you. You know, get the training from the manufacturers, learn how the software works, but learn how to communicate through a series of standards, you know. It'll revolutionize how you go about a job. Programming, a widely discussed topic and usually highly specific to any given console. Brad Schiller, who is here with us today, has written a really great handbook for programmers. He's up to the 3rd edition now. But it's also for designers and associated team members who work with programmers. This text is generic enough to be relevant regardless of what console you're using, but specific enough to be enlightening. The back of the book is great because it's also full of advice and stories from some of the best of the best. You can't miss it. It's lightweight, it's fun, it's easy to read. You know, I share it with my friends who haven't read it just because it's so easy to just pass along. So programming, I highly recommend checking out Brad Schiller's book. Color, as I mentioned, is probably the most complicated topic in our industry. Read as much as you can about color from an art perspective, from a technology perspective, all of it. It's complex, you know. Clifton Taylor is a lighting, scenic projection designer, theater, dance, opera, Broadway, concerts, everything really. His mastery of color is well known. I've had the chance to listen to his lectures in color in person, and they're just beautiful. I think there are hundreds of places to learn about color, but I've got to recommend his book, you know, Color and Light, Mixing in the Midst of an LED Revolution, a handbook for lighting designers. It's a bit of a mouthful of a title, but it's extraordinarily relevant to our work today. You know, and it's coming from someone who's really got their mind around this stuff. I want to mention, you know, sort of a side note about the Secret Lives of Color, which is a more recent discovery for me. but it's just a fun book that's an interesting way to digest a color. It's basically a rainbow book where there are entire pages dedicated to specific colors, and then it'll go into the history of the pigment and factoids about the color throughout time. It's just a super interesting way to digest color, but not nearly as technically functional as the first book. So that's more of a side note. So the next, people, places. I don't have a specific book for this, but I find most self-help books regarding interacting with people to be, inaccurate. So what I'll give you instead is the names of the conferences. I highly suggest LDI or Plaza when they happen again. Maybe not this year, but soon. Check out Showlight. That happens every 3 or 4 years in Europe. And then local conferences like Scanlight in Northern Europe. Just do some research. Figure out what's going on. I know there are a couple of tiny lighting conferences here in New York that I still haven't made time to go check out. So I'm sure your local area has something as well. You won't regret it. Your friends are going to be just as valuable to you as any of the other parts of this. Time. This book is a game changer. Good God, I wish this book was mandatory reading for all managers. Let's Stop Meeting This by Dick and Emily Axelrod. Amazing text, lightweight, simple, unbelievably smart. I believe we can fix meetings. Throw these in people's Christmas stockings. Just get it out there. Lifestyle books. Now, Ann McMill's The Assistant Lighting Designer's Toolkit is amazing. I don't assist that often, maybe once or twice a year, if that. I don't even feel comfortable calling myself an assistant because I don't do it that often, but the information in this text goes far beyond being an assistant. This book will teach you how to document and organize any part of the process. I mean, here's a great plate organization. You're going to get Steve Shelley's book on drafting, but it's in here too. She's got stuff on programming. It's a one-stop shop to putting together a complicated show and making your documentation perfect. So I have to recommend that for almost anyone in the business. Much like Steve Shelley, it's always close at hand for me. It's a reference manual. I love it. Brad Schiller has another book coming out soon. He just confirmed it's going to be September, so not next year. So keep an eye out for it. It's called Living the Lighting Life. And it should be a great look at all the ways people can make this career work. I'm only one story. There are a million ways to do this job and be successful. So I am super interested to see how this book comes out. I have just a few other recommendations, and that's it. The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron is a wonderful text that's helped me in the past. It's a bit more philosophical. The chapters are titled things like Recovering a Sense of Identity, Recovering a Sense of Abundance. It's more about conquering your own mind, which I think gets away from us all at times. But it's functional, and it's surprisingly helpful for our career. And last but not least is the Harvard Business Review Press. They put out these collections of essays from really smart individuals. There's one in particular, Work-Life Balance, that's really interesting. It's not just essays, it's also workshops and exercises that you can do to help you prioritize your life. It asks hard questions and provides you with the tools to answer them. So if you give this book a try, you'll have a much better sense of what's important to you, and that should help you focus in on that, and you can identify the parts of your life that are in trouble. So that's my lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm ready for any questions you might all have. I know we covered a lot of things, but feel free to ask anything on these topics or any specific questions on my career. I'm an open book.
Thanks, Luther. We do have some questions.
Great.
The first one is asking, from your perspective, which group has better efficiency in workflow, theater, event, or TV?
Well, I think the biggest trouble with that is you do have to define efficiency. So who gets it done the fastest? Events. I mean, one-day events who are loading in huge rigs, they figured out how to do things fast. It's a little messy. I think the theatrical tradition is most efficient. It's the most efficient way to live a life because the people who are in it understand a process. They've codified everything start to finish. And so it should, in theory, be less stressful day to day. That's also not always the case, but that's why I talked about time management and lifestyle and other things. So every industry has something that I've learned from, and I think that's been the real beauty of working interdisciplinary. There are so many smart people out there, and the things I learned from rock and roll programmers helped me fix that part of my life, and the things I learned from theater drafters helped me fix that part of my life. So analyze it yourself. Take what you can from every bit of it, but I think every industry has their strong suits.
All right, next question is asking, when setting up your drafting standards such as title block, did you study any specific designers for inspiration? And where can we find plots to review?
I did, and actually, just going back in the slide, This method of title block, which I've since moved away with, is very, very similar to Al Crawford's of Alvin Ailey. So it's not his template, and I don't want him to think I'm stealing, but yeah, I got a hold of one of his plots. So there are some resources online, and I'm trying to think about this, but I'm pretty sure it's just called the Lighting Archive. Ken Billington was a major contributor, so I highly encourage you to search the Lighting Archive or the Lighting Drafting Archive, and on that website, there are draftings from even, I actually think they have some Gene Rosenthal. They have some drafting from the 1920s or 30s, and then they go all the way up to Kinky Boots and like modern draft. I haven't looked at it in a couple of years, but that's where I go first for sort of great drafting. Beyond that, Live Design, I know, they put out like the drafting for the Super Bowl every year. So if you pay attention to Live Design, they'll put out a couple pieces of drafting every month. And so I have a folder in my company research folder that's just full of other people's good work. That also includes things like shop orders, magic sheets. You got to learn from the best, right? So it's a small collection that grows over time. But I'd start with the Lighting Archive, if that's the right title, I hope, and then Live Design for their big arena and event shows.
Okay, next question. How many colors do you have in your personal library, and how many are too many?
I've gone back and forth on this, so I don't have a good count for you. There are hundreds of palettes, but I don't know if I'd count that as hundreds of colors, because some of them are auto-generated. Some of them are ideas, like plus or minus green. They're not necessarily colors; they're more modifiers. I originally was trying to copy Ken and work off a 100 spectrum, but I'm not ready for that. I embrace the fact that I'm not that designer yet. I trimmed down to 30 2 years ago, and given any situation, I have a go-to 30. If I'm in a theater, that 30 is going to expand quickly. If I'm working on an opera or a show, I'll have a color theory that's backed up, and that's going to expand, and I'm going to bring in other tools. If I'm in TV, I know that I want better HSI control, and I'm going to have more modifier cues. So because my programming is modular, that number is going to change show to show. But in terms of falling in love with color, my right number was 30. Some people I know are like 10, and I'm like, that's not enough for me. But obviously Ken says 99. So that's a personal exploration, Start thinking about it. But I was overwhelmed with 99. 30 is where I'm living right now.
Okay, next question is asking, regarding networking, who is someone in the industry that you have not yet met but wish to, and why?
I'm incredibly lucky to live where I live and do what I do. And I think that I've met everyone I've studied with or studied about or under. I regret not being able to meet some designers before they passed. And there are designers who I've met, but I haven't had good heart-to-heart conversations with. So Durham Marenghi would probably be the biggest designer who I haven't had any real heart-to-hearts with yet. And Durham Marenghi is known for doing some of the biggest Olympics shows and some really, really large-scale productions out there. Durham Marenghi is one who I'd love to chat with.
Okay, next question. When choosing to decrease stress and improve lifestyle, what is the best thing to start with?
Journaling, introspection. It's hard to understand a problem until you have data. It might be obvious, but that first title slide, I'm a little chunkier than I am now. I've lost about 90 pounds over the last 2 years, and that was not possible until I started tracking my nutrition, right? So it's the same thing with anything we're doing. If you don't know where you are, how long you're working, why you're stressed out, you can't possibly start to fix it. So a little bit of journaling goes a long way.
All right, next question is related. Could you speak more about burning out, and would you recommend moving out of the situation for a while, like taking a couple of months off? Also, how do you break out of a creative block?
So 2 questions there. Yeah, the first one on burnout. If you don't figure out how to remove yourself from your situation, your body will. So that's what happened to me. I was working through burnout, and I was hospitalized. And my body was like, nope, you're either going to die or sit in bed for 2 months. So I sat in bed for 2 months, and that was painful, and I don't recommend that method. So I recommend you, if you're feeling burnt out, yeah, go hiking, go, figure out, live in a library, whatever feels right to you, but something's wrong. Your body will give you signals. You'll get sick, you'll be tired, you'll be angry, you'll snap at friends who don't deserve to be snapped at. And these are all signs, right? So appreciate those signs and internalize them. The second question I'm already forgetting. Sorry, Laura.
No, that's okay. How do you break out of a creative block?
Great, yeah. So there are many methods of doing that, and that's why I've recommended The Artist's Way. There's about 20 different chapters that will give you a different tool, and Twyla Tharp's The Creative Habit, because both of those artists experienced creative blocks that were very, very severe, and they have workshops and tools on how to do it. It's going to be different for everybody. So, things that have worked for me in the past, I like to fall into books, and I also like to fall into video games. I don't actually like to play video games. I turn on all the cheat codes. I like to go in them to experience somebody else's vision for a world or somebody else's idea of how things could be. And that's what I do to sort of reset my brain, get out of reality, and then come back to it. I don't have a lot of time for that, but I do need to do it sometimes. And so I'll be like, what's a beautiful looking game? What's a beautiful looking book? Or art books. I've been really, really big into art books recently. Some artists who've been playing with light and sound and movement and space, and getting to read and see their work helps me think about what I think is important in my own work. So that's the other set of books here. I have all the books for today, but then I also have a bunch of books from, and you guys might be interested in this, Mary Corse. Mary Corse is like a white light artist who's been doing large scale lighting installations, since the late 60s, and so her work was really interesting, and it's reinvigorated my love of white light. So yeah, I hope that answered it.
Yeah, we do have another question that's related to what you were just talking about with the books. Do you prefer digital books or printed books?
I look at screens all day, every day. I prefer digital books because I don't like owning things anymore, and I've done everything I can to own as few things as possible. But if you are drafting and then programming and then doing webinars, I guess too, when you're off, like, screen fatigue is real too. So I keep a healthy mix, and I've also loved book sharing. So a lot of stuff I have is online, but I have to mix it up, and that's what I'd recommend.
Okay, wonderful. It looks like that was the last question that came in. Luther, did you have contact information that you wanted to share for people to reach out to you with questions?
Yeah, so we can go back to the first slide. I'm realizing that's just my website, but my email, it's also in the other two webinars, but it's luther@frankllighting.com. It's very simple. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for presenting again. It's always a pleasure to hear your presentations. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending. If you're interested in learning about our upcoming sessions, just visit pro.harman.com and the full calendar is there. As I mentioned before, we're adding about 20 sessions to the month of July and then more in August. So please check that out. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you, Laura.